Welcome to the Deep Dive, where I uploaded my transcript for the podcast and have two AI hosts talk about it. They may go into more depth than I went into. So without further ado, here's the Deep Dive.
All right, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're going to get into something pretty intense. Intense emotional reactions.
Uh-oh. Sounds heavy.
Yeah, a little bit. But super fascinating, I promise. And hopefully we can all learn something useful. I mean, we've all been there, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Someone loses it over like a spilled coffee.
Oh, or like road rage.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or someone throws a total tantrum when they don't get their way.
Yeah.
Like, what's really going on there under the surface?
Right. Like, what's the why of these intense reactions? That's actually what our source material for this deep dive is called.
Perfect timing. What is it?
It's an audio series called Intense Emotional Reactions, The Why of Things. This particular episode is all about understanding those reactions, especially when they might be connected to something called cluster B personality disorders.
Okay, cluster B personality disorders. For those of us who, maybe need a little refresher, what are we talking about here?
Sure. So think of personality as like a unique way each of us thinks, feels, and behaves. But sometimes those patterns can cause some pretty big problems in someone's relationships, in their life, And that's when we might be talking about a personality disorder.
Oh, okay.
And cluster B is just a group of these disorders that share some common traits, especially when it comes to, you guessed it,
emotional reactions.
Bingo.
So we're not just talking about having a bad day here.
Right, exactly. Like everyone has a bad day sometimes.
For sure.
But this is something deeper, more consistent. We're talking about recurring patterns of these really intense, often unpredictable emotions and behaviors.
And what's really interesting about this is these reactions can be so confusing, right? Even hurtful to the people on the receiving end.
Oh, absolutely. It can feel like you're walking on eggshells.
All the time.
Yeah, around someone who's prone to these kind of outbursts.
Totally. So that's why we're here, to figure out the why.
The why behind these reactions.
Yes.
Because once you start to understand the underlying causes, you can navigate these situations a lot better. Maybe even, protect yourself.
Protect yourself. Okay. I like where this is going.
Yeah.
So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Which cluster B personality disorders are we focusing on?
Okay, so in this audio series, they break it down into 4 types.
Well, 4. Okay.
First, there's something called impulsive disregard disorder.
Impulsive disregard disorder.
Yeah, or ID.
ID.
Then there's extreme self-focus disorder.
Okay.
They call it ESFD, or narcissistic personality disorder, which you've probably heard of.
Yeah, that one rings a bell.
Yeah. Then there's emotional intensity disorder.
Got it.
EID for short, also known as borderline personality disorder.
Okay.
And last but not least, dramatic attention-seeking disorder, or DASD, which is also called histrionic personality disorder.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Okay, so how do each of these actually play into those big, intense reactions we keep talking about?
All right, let's start with impulsive disregard disorder, ID.
Okay.
One of the key takeaways here is that for people with ID, it's all about control. Maintaining it, exerting it, so when that sense of control is threatened, even a little bit, boom, anger, outbursts, and a real need to kind of dominate the situation.
It's interesting. You're not saying it's necessarily about deep feelings, though, right? It's more about manipulating things back to their advantage.
Exactly. It's less about genuine feelings and more about regaining that control.
Ah, okay.
Oh.
That makes sense. So extreme self-focus disorder, that's the one where someone just cannot handle criticism.
Yeah, pretty much. With ESFD, also called narcissistic personality disorder, everything revolves around protecting their ego.
And that ego is pretty fragile.
Usually, yeah. So any perceived slight or criticism or even just like a tiny disagreement can feel like this huge attack on their whole sense of self-worth.
Right, because in their world, they're superior.
Right. Remember, their entire world revolves around maintaining this sense of superiority.
So those intense reactions, are they all about trying to desperately uphold that image, that superior image?
Precisely. And this audio series actually had this great example.
Oh, tell me.
It was about this woman who had like a total meltdown.
Oh, no.
Because she was accidentally embarrassed in front of her friend.
Ouch. Yeah, so in her mind, that carefully crafted image was totally shattered.
Exactly. It's all about defending that fragile sense of self, even if the reaction seems way over the top.
Right. It's fascinating because it really highlights how much their internal world is driving those external outbursts.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered ID, ESFD. What about emotional intensity disorder? disorder? What's fueling those intense emotions?
So this one is a little bit different. With EID or borderline personality disorder, it's this constant like roller coaster of emotions.
Oh boy.
Imagine like swinging from extreme adoration to like intense anger or even hatred, all in a short amount of time.
Yikes. So the relationships must be
Tumultuous.
Yeah.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
a wild ride you can't get off.
I bet.
And a lot of times these intense reactions are coming from this deep fear of abandonment and this fundamental feeling of inadequacy.
So it sounds incredibly painful for everyone involved.
It really is. And one of the most challenging things about this is that people with EID often aren't totally aware of how much their emotional outbursts are affecting other people.
It's like they're drowning in their own feelings.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's why understanding this underlying fear and insecurity is so crucial when you're interacting with someone with EID.
Okay, we've got one more to go. Dramatic attention-seeking disorder. What's the deal with their intense reactions?
So with DASD or histrionic personality disorder, the name kind of gives it away.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about that attention, and they will use, whatever means necessary, including these big dramatic displays of emotion to get it.
So whether they're showering someone with like over-the-top affection or throwing a tantrum, it's all about getting that spotlight back on them.
You got it. The actual issue might be small, but the reaction, it's going to be big. The drama is the point. And it's important to remember this isn't necessarily like intentional manipulation. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it comes from this very deep-seated need for validation, reassurance.
So it's like a cry for attention and connection,
Yeah.
even if it comes across in this really dysfunctional way.
Exactly. It's about understanding that beneath those big dramatic displays is a very real need for love and belonging.
Wow. Okay. This is so insightful. It's like we're peeling back the layers of the onion here and finally understanding what's at the core of these, seemingly inexplicable behaviors.
Right.
But before we move on, I think we need to talk about the impact these reactions have on the people around them.
Yeah.
Like the receiving end of this. It can't be easy.
Oh, absolutely. That's such an important conversation to have. What impact do these reactions have on relationships, and how do we actually protect ourselves when we're navigating these tricky situations?
Yes. I'm glad you said that because that's exactly where we're going next.
Awesome. I can't wait to unpack this further.
Okay. So we're back. And I think it's time to talk about like the most important part of this whole thing. What do we do with all this new knowledge about these personality types?
Right.
Understanding the why behind these reactions is one thing, but how do we actually deal with these situations in real life?
Such a good point. It's not enough to just understand the why. We need actual tools for dealing with this stuff.
Yeah, like what do I do when my boss is having a total meltdown?
Right. And that's where boundaries come in.
Okay, boundaries. I hear that word a lot, but to be honest, it can feel kind of abstract. What does that actually look like in real life?
Well, think of it like, drawing a line in the sand. This is okay. This is not okay. It's about communicating your limits really clearly and sticking to them consistently.
So it's less about trying to control their behavior and more about how we respond to it.
Exactly. You can't force someone to change. But you can definitely choose how you engage with their behavior or, don't engage.
Okay, so walk me through this. Let's say someone's having like a classic cluster B meltdown, yelling, accusations, the whole 9 yards. What do I do? How do I set a boundary in that moment?
First, remember, it's not about being mean or dismissive. It's about protecting yourself. So you might say something like, hey, I understand that you're upset, but I'm not okay with being yelled at. If you keep doing this, I'm going to have to leave the room.
So clear, calm, direct. Don't get sucked into the drama.
Exactly. Don't get sucked in. And this is where consistency is so important. If you say you're going to leave, you have to leave.
No empty threats.
Right. If you say you won't engage in a certain topic, then stick to your guns. Boundaries only work if you enforce them.
Easier said than done, though, right? What if they just don't respect those boundaries? Keep pushing.
It can be really tough, especially if you're dealing with someone who is just used to getting their way. That's why having a support system is so important. Talk to someone who understands what you're going through. Could be friends, family, a therapist. They can help you stay grounded, remind you that you're not alone.
Support systems. So crucial. It's like having a life raft, when you're navigating choppy emotional waters.
I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking of life rafts, one of the best things you can do for yourself in these situations is to prioritize self-care. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Preach. Self-care is so important. But how does that tie into dealing with someone else's intense emotional reactions?
It's about recognizing that just being around that kind of energy can be really draining. So you got to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally. This could mean like taking a long bath, going for a run, just spending time doing something that you actually enjoy.
Yes. Putting on your own oxygen mask first before assisting others.
Exactly. And sometimes self-care might also mean getting some professional help. A therapist can give you a safe space to process your emotions, help you develop healthy coping mechanisms, come up with a plan for navigating these tricky relationships.
It's true. We often underestimate the power of just talking to someone who's trained to help us understand and deal with this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what to do when someone is having one of these reactions, but what about preventing them in the first place?
Oh, is that even possible?
Well, there are definitely some things you can do to try to minimize these intense emotional outbursts, but no guarantees, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough.
The key is to recognize the early warning signs and kind of adjust your approach based on what you're seeing. So, for example, if you know you're dealing with someone with ID, impulsive disregard disorder, try to avoid situations where they might feel like they're losing control.
So if they always has VE to be the one driving, maybe offer to take the wheel this time.
Exactly. Or, if you're dealing with someone with ESFD, that extreme self-focus disorder, tread carefully when you're giving feedback or making suggestions. Their ego can be super sensitive, so approach these conversations with extra care, and validation.
That's like walking through a minefield of emotions. Got to be careful where you step.
Great analogy. Okay, and speaking of minefields, let's talk about EID, or borderline personality disorder. One of the best ways to prevent these big reactions is just to be consistent and reliable.
Because their biggest fear is abandonment.
Exactly. So making sure that you follow through on your commitments, showing up for them emotionally, that can go a long way in creating a sense of safety, stability for them.
They're like being that secure base that they can rely on no matter what.
Yes, exactly. And finally, for folks with DASD, that dramatic attention-seeking disorder, the key is to just not feed into the drama.
So don't give them that over-the-top reaction that they're craving.
Exactly. Stay calm, keep things low-key, and try to redirect the conversation to something that's, less emotionally charged.
So it sounds like prevention is all about understanding their triggers.
Yeah.
And then adjusting our approach to try and, create a calmer environment.
You got it. It's about being proactive and strategic in how we interact with people to try to minimize, the chances of those big emotional blow-ups.
This is so helpful. I feel like I'm finally starting to wrap my head around this whole thing. It's complicated.
It is.
But, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we can all do to create a more understanding and supportive world. For people with these disorders, it's so easy to focus on the negative, the behaviors. But I think it's really important to remember that there are real human beings struggling on the other side of this.
That is so important. And I think the biggest thing we can do is just educate ourselves and challenge that stigma that surrounds these disorders.
Right. Knowledge is power. The more we understand, the less likely we are to judge and dismiss.
Exactly. And remember, seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. If you or someone you know is struggling with any of this, please reach out. Get some professional support. There are resources out there, and there is always hope for healing and growth.
Beautifully said. Okay, so on that note, I think it's time for us to take a moment and reflect on what we've learned today and how we can all actually use this in our own lives. What are some key takeaways, insights, anything you're going to try to apply moving forward?
This has been such a good conversation. I think the key takeaway, for me at least, is that understanding the why behind these intense emotional reactions, it's so crucial for responding with compassion and awareness, both for ourselves and for others.
Yes.
Yeah.
And remember to set boundaries and prioritize our own self-care. Super important tools for protecting our own well-being, especially when we're dealing with these kinds of situations.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. All right. So we'll be back next time with another deep dive into another fascinating topic.
Sounds good. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking care of yourselves.
As we've been talking about all of this, I keep thinking about the impact these intense emotional reactions have on relationships.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like you're trying to build a house on shifting sand.
I know, right?
There's no stability.
Absolutely. These kinds of behaviors can just totally erode trust.
Right.
And you're constantly on edge, like, when's the next explosion going to happen?
Exactly. And it's not just romantic relationships that suffer.
Oh, no.
It's families, it's friendships, it's even professional relationships.
Oh, for sure. Imagine working with someone who like blows up all the time.
Ugh, yeah. No thanks.
It creates such a toxic environment.
It's got to be impossible to get anything done.
It makes you wonder how anyone in these relationships copes.
Right. Like, how do you stay afloat? It must take so much energy and resilience.
It really does. And that actually brings us back to what we were talking about earlier.
Self-care.
Yes, self-care. When you're constantly dealing with these emotional minefields, you have to make time for yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Otherwise, you will burn out. Guaranteed.
So what are some good self-care strategies for people who are dealing with this every day?
Well, it looks different for everyone, but some really important things are like, setting aside time to do things you genuinely enjoy.
Okay, yeah. Connecting with people who support you.
That support system.
Yeah. People who can give you a listening ear, some perspective.
For sure.
And, even exploring some mindfulness techniques.
Oh, interesting.
Which can really help you stay grounded in the present moment.
Oh, I like that. It's like building a little fortress of resilience around yourself so you can handle anything.
So you can weather those storms, yeah.
Yeah. And we got to remember, too, professional help is always an option. Don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist or counselor. They can give you so much support.
Oh, yeah.
Tools and coping strategies and just a safe space to, process everything.
They can be such a valuable guide.
Right. When you're navigating all of this.
Exactly. It's all about finding those sources of support and strength, the things that help you stay balanced, even when it feels like everything around you is chaotic.
Perfectly said. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that we've learned a lot today.
We have.
Yeah.
About intense emotional reactions.
The why behind them, especially in the context of these cluster B personality disorders.
Yes. We talked about the different types, the impact they have, the importance of those boundaries and self-care. I mean, it's a lot.
It is.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that knowledge is power. The more we understand these patterns, the better equipped we are to actually deal with them.
And protect ourselves, too.
Exactly. And, maybe even help the people around us who are struggling.
I hope so. Understanding leads to compassion for ourselves and for others.
Beautifully said. All right, so as we wrap up today, I just want to encourage everyone to think about what resonated with you. What will you do differently now? How will you take care of yourselves moving forward? Because you know what? You deserve to feel safe and respected in your relationships.
Yes, you do.
And if you're struggling, remember, you're not alone. Reach out, get support. There are people who care. And there's always hope for healing and for growth. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep taking care of yourselves.
See you next time.